In 1865, a book was published, centering on a young girl who winds up in a strange and unusual world. That book was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, and has since become one of the most famous stories of the 19th century. But what inspired Carroll to create this fantastical land of talking animals and nonsense rhymes? For starters, he was good friends with Henry Liddell, a Dean of Oxford, and he would later befriend his daughters, one of whom was named Alice. He would often tell them stories, and this was one she asked if he could write down. He did, and later sent the manuscript to potential publishers. After it was published, the book was an enormous success and even led to a sequel titled Through the Looking Glass. In both stories, Alice wanders through a world of strange creatures with unique customs. Sometimes she was impressed with them, and at other points she would grow frustrated and try to explain the right way of doing things. Some of those she encountered included a smoking caterpillar who gave her some advice, a Mad Hatter tea party full of riddles, and even Humpty Dumpty from the famous nursery rhyme. One of the most memorable characters in Alice in Wonderland is the Cheshire Cat, a smiling feline who can reappear and disappear at will. When most people are reminded of Carroll's story, this is probably the image most think of first. It's easy to see why these two books provided such an impact, as Carroll had an incredible imagination and way with words when describing the nonsensical logic of Wonderland and its inhabitants. I think many children could also relate to Alice, as she struggles to understand the strange riddles and decision-making of the Wonderland citizens, not unlike children finding the behavior of adults most peculiar. Looking at it through older eyes, it's easy to read Alice in Wonderland as a political allegory. Events like the caucus race, Alice's meetings with the temperamental Queen of Hearts and the bossy Red Queen, and Alice's trial are examples of Carroll commenting on the politics and rules of the era. Ironically, even though the Queen of Hearts was said to be inspired by Queen Victoria, it apparently flew over her head, as she was a big fan of the Alice in Wonderland books. The use of various poems also stayed with readers, the Walrus and the Carpenter being especially notable. Jabberwocky, about a ferocious dragon-like creature, and How Doth the Little Crocodile have also entered the public lexicon. John Tenniel's illustrations have also remained highly recognized since the book's publications. I think Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass are timeless stories that manage to stand the test of time, because, let's be honest, our world is still as bizarre and the human race is still as head-scratching as it was when Lewis Carroll first told of Alice's trips down the rabbit hole and through the mirror. It's a little surprise that several adaptations have been made based on Alice in Wonderland, along with plenty of unique interpretations. The books involve Alice going from one place to another, often meeting a new character each time, so they're difficult stories to adapt due to the episodic plotting and purposely nonsensical nature. As a result, I actually think that while there have certainly been good adaptations, there's yet to be a definitive one. One notable early screen version was released in 1933 from Paramount Pictures. Starring Charlotte Henry as Alice, along with several big Hollywood names of the day, what's eye-catching about this adaptation is the way it uses special effects technology to bring Wonderland to life. The costumes and makeup are quite surreal, the production design is imaginative. The movie does rush through as many characters and locations as possible as it sends Alice on her way. This Alice is also really eager, as opposed to the one in the original story who was just trying to make sense of it all. As an early talkie, it's certainly an interesting take though. One filmmaker who had a particular fondness for the books was Walt Disney, who attempted for years to make an adaptation and learned firsthand the struggles with telling such an episodic story in a film format. He originally thought of making it as a hybrid of live-action animation, but ultimately decided a fully animated feature was the best approach. Even though the Disney version cannot quite overcome that structural element, it's still a really good movie. Through the use of songs, it tries hard to utilize as many of Carroll's rhymes as possible, and the directors, artists, and animators did come up with clever scenes involving them. Alice, voiced by Catherine Beaumont, is mainly preoccupied with returning home, and has little patience for everyone she encounters, all of whom do make a memorable impression. One of the best scenes in the movie is the tea party, with Ed Wynn delivering a hilarious turn as the Mad Hatter. The sequence with the marching playing cards is also an exquisite piece of animation. Alice in Wonderland is a movie that really belongs to the animators and Mary Blair's art direction. Interestingly enough, Walt himself was disappointed in the finished film, feeling it lacked heart and that Alice wound up a flat character. I personally don't think a story like Alice in Wonderland lends itself to having emotions, but more so witty visual gags, which I think the film did succeed at. Unfortunately, the movie was also a box office disappointment on original release. Despite these factors, Walt still approved the creation of 2 rides based on the movie in Disneyland. When Disney re-released Alice in Wonderland in 1974, they marketed the film specifically to the psychedelic crowd who had taken to its images, so the film did eventually find an appreciative audience, just probably not the one the studio expected. In 1985, Irwin Allen produced a television miniseries on Alice in Wonderland, which aired over 2 nights on CBS. This musical adaptation did a solid job of telling the story, with Natalie Gregory successfully carrying it as Alice. It certainly attempted to keep the surrealness of the source material, although part of me wonders if Allen made a bet that he could put several big stars in ridiculous costumes and makeup. A few sequences that stand out include a dance number with Sammy Davis Jr. as the caterpillar and Carol Channing's White Queen turning into a sheep. If you're up for spending 3 hours in Wonderland, it's a decent watch. A movie I watched quite often on video when I was very young was The Care Bears Adventure in Wonderland. Like the title implies, this animated film sends the famous greeting card bears to Wonderland, along with a girl named Alice. I had nostalgic memories of this, but I had not seen it in over 20 years. For this video, I decided to revisit it, and unfortunately found the film did not particularly hold up. The artists and animators at Nelvana actually did a really good job of depicting Wonderland and designing the inhabitants there. They definitely captured the nonsensical feel of the place. The Cheshire Cat, who performs a few catchy rap numbers, especially leaves an impression. The problem is that the Care Bears don't really fit in Wonderland, and it was jarring whenever they popped up. Alice, depicted here as an 80s teenage girl with low self-esteem, is also a bit of a bore. The movie's just a lot of colors and noise. It's perfectly adequate viewing for a young child, though, which is the target audience for it. Disney Channel produced a children's series titled Adventures in Wonderland in the 90s. The show involved Alice frequently visiting Wonderland, where she's friends with many of the characters, with some lesson often learned at some point. It's a bit funny seeing Alice so chummy with a Red Queen, but it is a show intended for preschool children. I did not watch the show much in my youth, and in fact my main memory of it was a presence in Spaceship Earth at Epcot. Yes, really, there were these television monitors within the attraction that showed the characters, and they surprisingly stayed there several years after the show had already ended. For something aimed at a more adult audience, there's the video game American McGee's Alice. This one depicts her journey through a dark and twisted version of Wonderland. I've not played the game, but remember being really creeped out by the cover when I spotted it on a store shelf in the early 2000s. A number of years ago, I even talked about said cover with YouTuber Hymetude as part of a countdown of scary childhood memories. Filmmakers like Wes Craven and several studios have tried to adapt American McGee's Alice into a movie, but nothing has come of this. The latest attempt was announced a few months ago, with screenwriter David Hayter signing on to develop a television series, so we'll see if this becomes a reality. As I mentioned earlier, the episodic nature of the story has made it a tricky text to adapt, so when Tim Burton decided to direct his own Alice in Wonderland movie, he sought to avoid that by giving Alice a more traditional narrative rather than merely adapting the book. The result ended up being a sequel to the original story, with an adult Alice trying to help Wonderland overthrow the tyrannical Red Queen. Burton and screenwriter Linda Woolverton seem to really latch onto the political themes of Carroll's books, as we see how the Queen's actions affect the citizens of Wonderland. I thought that helped the movie, and Burton put together some solid set pieces as he depicts Wonderland in his usual style. Although in this movie it's actually called Underland, a clever nod to Carroll's original manuscript, which was titled Alice's Adventures Underground. Mia Wasikowska is really good as Alice, properly portraying her reactions to revisiting this strange, familiar place. I'm not the biggest fan of it utilizing a prophecy plot device, which runs counter to Wonderland being a nonsensical, unpredictable place that doesn't run on logic. Nonetheless, I do really enjoy Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland and find it a well-done interpretation of the material. Oddly, I see the film counted as part of the current trend of Disney live-action remakes, but I disagree with that. It does not use any of the elements devised for the earlier animated film, and is very clearly supposed to take place after the events of the original books. The massive success of that film led to a sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass, released 6 years later. Directed by James Bobbin, this one had plenty of neat visuals, and Sacha Baron Cohen has a fun performance as Time. The plot, involving Alice using time travel to save the Mad Hatter's family, is mostly done as an excuse to tell us how these characters attain their personalities and familiar traits. It's an okay diversion, but nothing particularly memorable. This was just a sample of adaptations of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, though, as Lewis Carroll's stories have inspired so many creators and filmmakers who have brought their own ideas to the table as they seek to understand his unique world full of strange poems, wondrous creatures, and smart satire. I'm not sure even he imagined Alice falling down that rabbit hole would remain so impactful to many generations. See you next time.